Hello world! Welcome to Learning Java, one byte at a time. This is video 42 in a tutorial series geared at bringing the wonderful wide world of Java to those with little or no programming experience. This video is a continuation of the development of the Booker application, a vehicle appraisal app. In the last video, we were continuing the construction of our view class by defining all of our getter methods so that whenever the user clicks on Generate Sales Ad or Save Project, that the model class is able to interface using the controller class and access the getter methods to pull all of that information in and either generate a sales ad or send it to the data access object where it could store it to the database or store it to a file. In this video, we're going to begin our setter classes, and the setter classes are going to have the very important purpose of whether the user clicks a load previous project, it's going to need to parse all of that data from the database or the file and access the setter methods to populate the view objects with all of that information. And in doing so, we're going to have to jump into Notepad++, and we have finished our getter methods, as you can see here. So now we're going to begin writing our setter methods, which are going to be very similar. So we'll start from the top with the vehicle name. So this one's going to be, like everything, is going to be a public. All of the setter methods are going to be void. They're not going to be returning anything. They're going to be accepting arguments though. So if we start with the setter, let's say set vehicle name, we're going to accept a string value that we're going to call vehicle name. And we're going to access the view object, the vehicle name text field, and we're going to use the set text method and pass through the value of whatever the vehicle name is. So pretty easy. Next, we're going to do a public void set vehicle make. This as well is going to accept a string that we'll call vehicle make, and we're going to take that string and pass it through to the vehicle make text field by accessing the vehicle set text method and pass through the vehicle make as the value. After that, we have a public void called set vehicle model. We'll have a string pass through called vehicle model, and we're going to take that string and pass it through to the view object, the vehicle model text field, using the set text method and passing that through as an argument. Okay, after that, we're going to do the base cost. And this one is going to accept a double value because it's a numerical value. So we'll take a double, we'll call it vehicle base cost. And we're going to need to perform a little bit of conversion, just like in the previous video. So we're going to take the vehicle base cost text field, and we're going to set the text equal to. Now, alternatively, in the last video, we used the double wrapper object and the integer wrapper object to perform the conversions using their parse methods. In this particular case, we're going to take a numerical value and we're going to need to convert it to a string value. And so for this case, we're going to use the string object, and the string object has a method called value of. And this method will actually accept a variety of different values. It'll accept double values, integer values, float values, all sorts of different values can be passed to the value of method. And this being an overloaded method, we'll be able to select which particular value is being passed through, send it to that particular version of the method, and then we'll always be able to convert it to a string value. And so we'll pass through what is initially a double numerical value called the vehicle base cost to the method of the string object called value of, and that method will then convert that to string data, which is going to be what the set text method of that visual element is going to be expecting. And you'll see we'll be doing this with all of the numeric data. So after the vehicle cost, we're going to need a public void method to set the vehicle year. This one will be expecting an integer, so we'll pass through an int called vehicle year. And then we will likewise access the vehicle year text field. We're going to set the text, and since it's expecting string data, we're going to need to access the value of function of the string object and pass through the vehicle year, just like so. All right, next we're going to set the vehicle transmission. And so assuming that they are loading a previously saved file, we know that this is going to be stored to the database of the file as a string that reads either automatic or manual or EV. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to build an if case, a case selector that's going to be expecting one of these three values. So let's start by declaring it as a public void. This is going to be set vehicle transmission. And we're going to be expecting a string that we'll call vehicle transmission. And with whatever string is passed through, we're going to check to see if vehicle transmission, the string that's passed through, and we're going to use the equals method. The equals method is what's used whenever you're comparing the value of strings or the value of other objects, not to be confused with the equals operator, which looks like two equal signs. That's only going to be used for comparing primitive numeric data. With the value of strings being objects, we need to make sure that we're using the equals method because that's actually built for comparing the value of objects. So if the string that we've passed through called vehicle transmission, and it being a string has this method called .equals, we're going to pass through the value that we're going to compare it to, which is going to be automatic. And this, of course, is why that spelling also becomes very important because we want to make sure that it matches exactly. If in case it is automatic, we're going to take the vehicle transmission automatic radio button and we're going to call a method called doClick, which is going to activate it. Okay, now in the case that that's not what it says, we're going to do an else if vehicle transmission, which is the string we're passing through. We're going to call the equals method on that string object. We're going to pass through a value. Let's do manual. Actually, let's do EV, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. The order of this is actually going to be very important. If it is in fact an electric vehicle, we're going to access the EV radio button, and we're going to doClick it. And then finally, we're going to do just a simply else statement, because we know that it wouldn't have been able to be saved if it didn't have this value selected with one of these buttons. And so we don't need to account for the possibility that none of these buttons was selected. We know for sure if we're calling that data file that it was selected, because it wouldn't have been saved in the first place. We would have caught that error when saving the file if none of them were selected. So we can be confident that it's selected at this point. So we don't need another else if, and we don't need to account for that possibility. We can simply default to an else clause. And in the else clause, we're going to check to see, in the case that it wasn't automatic and wasn't EV, then we know for sure that it had to be manual. And so we're not even going to check the value. We're just going to go ahead and set the vehicle transmission manual radio button to doClick. And it makes the code a little bit more parsimonious there. All right, and that's all we need for the set vehicle transmission method. Next, we will set the vehicle drive. So we have another public void called set vehicle drive. This one is also going to expect a string value that we'll simply call vehicle drive. And just as with the set vehicle transmission, we're going to need a case selector. So let's check to see if vehicle drive dot equals, and we're going to be looking for rear wheel drive. And in the case that it does equal rear wheel drive, we're going to access the vehicle drive rear wheel drive radio button and call a doClick method. We're going to click that. Now, else if the vehicle drive equals all-wheel drive, then in that case, we're going to find the vehicle drive all-wheel drive radio button and do a doClick on that. And then just as before, we know that it wouldn't have made it to the save point if it wasn't all selected, so we're just going to use an else clause. If it wasn't the rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, let's just assume that it was the front-wheel drive. We'll access the vehicle front-wheel drive radio button, and we'll call a doClick on that. And that is all we need for the set vehicle drive. So next we're going to do the safety features. So let's check the airbags and ABS and rear view camera. And so in the event that those were sent back as true Boolean values, let's do a public void set vehicle airbags. We're going to be looking for a Boolean value that we'll call vehicle airbags. And once we have that Boolean value, we're going to check. And we can do if vehicle airbags, then find the vehicle airbags checkbox and do a do-click, just like so. And then if that's not the case, let's see. And if that's not the case, we're not going to actually do anything at all, because nothing needs to be done, because we're going to assume that project, or that previous project didn't already have that button clicked. So we have set vehicle airbags, we have a Boolean value called vehicle airbags. We're going to check to see if that Boolean value is a true, in which case we're going to do a do click on that checkbox. All right, so then after that, we'll check the ABS. Set vehicle ABS, looking for that Boolean value that we'll call vehicle ABS. And we're going to check if that Boolean value is true. Then let's find that checkbox called the vehicle ABS checkbox, and let's do a do click on it. All right, wonderful. Lastly, we have a public void set vehicle rear view camera, looking for a Boolean value that we'll call vehicle rear view camera. And if that returns true, rear view camera is true, then we will find that checkbox and do a do click on it. All right, excellent. All right, next we can start the grade. So we'll check by having a public, if I can type, public void set vehicle grade. And this is going to be looking for a string value. We'll call it vehicle grade. And that string value will have a case selector to see if it is equal to the three values, or two of the three values, I should say. So if vehicle grade, and it being a string, we need to use the equals method, equals standard. Then we will find the vehicle grade standard radio button and call a do click on that. And else if vehicle grade equals performance, then we know we need to find the vehicle grade performance radio button and call a do click on that. And finally, with a simple else clause, we will find the vehicle grade economy radio button and call a do click on that. And that's everything we need for the grade setter. Next, we can move down to the mileage. So we're going to be calling set vehicle mileage. We're going to be expecting an integer value. So let's have an int that we'll call vehicle mileage. And with that integer, we are going to find the vehicle mileage text field, which will be expecting text if we call the set text method. So we need to make sure that we have the string object and call the value of method and pass through the vehicle mileage so that it is properly converted from an int to a string. Next, we can do the previous owners. So this is going to be a combination of a checkbox and a text field. So let's do a public void called set previous owners enabled. So we'll do the checkbox first. This will be a Boolean value that we'll call vehicle previous owners. And in the case that there are, in fact, it is true that there were previous owners, we're going to take the vehicle previous owners checkbox and we're going to set selected so that we can check that box with the vehicle previous owners Boolean value. And so what we're essentially doing is we're accepting a Boolean value that could be true or false. So it could be true or false that there were previous owners. That true or false value is going to be passed through to the setSelected method of that checkbox view element. And so if it turns out that this is a false value, then we're going to call setSelected and pass through a false value, which will leave it unselected. If it turns out that it was true, then it's going to pass through a true value to setSelected, which will actually checkmark that box. Now the second thing we need to do is, because the view element, when it's unselected, is going to have the text field be not enabled. And so if there were no previous owners, that checkbox is unselected, we don't want that text field to even be accessible to the user. We don't want them to be able to type in any value there if the checkbox is not selected. Now, assuming that there were any amount of previous owners in that the checkbox is selected, then we're going to take that text field and we're going to enable it. We're going to make it accessible to the user to have some sort of value in there. So what we're going to need to do is, upon setting the previous owner's enabled checkbox, we're then going to make that text field either enabled or disabled. And the way that we're going to do that is by accessing the previous owner's text field. Set enabled is going to be equal to whether or not there were previous owners. So if it turns out that this value gets passed through as false, we're calling a set enabled, but we're passing through a false value. And so that text field is not enabled. If it turns out that this value is true, then we're going to have the set enabled set equal to true. And so it's going to be automatically enabled or disabled based on whether or not there were any previous owners. So we can simply access the previous owners Boolean that's being passed through and use that as the value to whether or not that text field is being set to being enabled. Next, we're going to need to set the value of the previous owners in the case that there were any. So we'll do a public void set previous owners just as is. This is going to be an integer that we're going to call vehicle previous owners. And since it's a separate method, we're not going to have to worry about the fact that these two variables have the same name, because they're local variables, so they're only going to be recognized locally. And so this having the same name is not going to affect it. This one over here is not going to affect this method over here. So it's okay to have them as the same name. So now in this case, we're going to need to set the vehicle previous owners text field. We're going to call a setText method. We're going to pass through, because it's an integer, a string value of whatever the vehicle previous owner's integer converted to a string would be. And then what we need to do is we need to do a check. So we're going to say if vehicle previous owners is not equal to 0. And so if it does in fact have a value, then let's set the vehicle previous owners enabled to true. And so if there is a value there, we're going to set it to true and we're going to make it enabled. Else, if it does not have a value, so if it is set to equal, we're going to set that same element to false. And so this will protect against the case that there happens to be a 0 previous owners, but having that text field accidentally enabled, which would would create a bug in the interface. And so we want to make sure that we account for that bug. So after the previous owners, the next set that we need to write is going to be for the luxury features. So we'll start with the keyless entry. So be a public void set vehicle keyless entry. We're going to be expecting Boolean values for these, so we'll call them vehicle keyless entry, and we're going to take that true or false value and we're going to run a check. So if vehicle keyless entry is true, then let's do a vehicle keyless entry. That's going to be a checkbox, and we're going to do a do click on that checkbox. All right. Set vehicle premium sound is also going to accept a Boolean value that we'll call vehicle premium sound. And that Boolean is going to be tested if vehicle premium sound, and if it's valid, then we will have the vehicle premium sound checkbox with a doClick method. Otherwise, we won't do anything. We'll do a public void set vehicle GPS navigation. This one will also expect a Boolean that will call vehicle GPS navigation. And we're going to check that to see if it's true. If vehicle GPS navigation, then find that view element and do a doClick on it, just like so. All right. Coming down, we have the class next. So let's do a public void set vehicle class. This one's going to be expecting a string element that we'll call vehicle class. And we're going to check the value of that string. So if vehicle class string that's being passed through equals the value of sport, then let's find the vehicle class sport radio button and do a doClick on that. Else, if the vehicle class equals luxury, then let's find the vehicle class luxury radio button and do a doClick on that one. And if it's neither one of those, let's just assume that it is a utility. So we'll find the vehicle class utility radio button and perform a doClick on that one. And that's everything that we need for the vehicle class method. Next, we're going to check the vehicle accident history. So this is a public void set vehicle accident history. We're going to be expecting a Boolean that we'll call vehicle accident history. And then we're going to check that Boolean if it in fact does have an accident. Then let's access that view element and perform a doClick on it. Let's check that box. Next, we have the commission rate. So a public void set vehicle commission rate. This one will be expecting a double value because, again, it's going to be a decimal. We'll call it vehicle commission rate. And we'll take that value, and we're going to need, again, parse that decimal value to a string. So let's first access the vehicle commission rate text field. Let's set the text of the text field, which is going to be expecting a string, to a value of whatever that double is being passed through, the vehicle commission rate, throwing that to the value of the string object so that we can convert that to a string. And then, of course, since it's going to be a decimal, let's go ahead and multiply that by 100. And so if it's sending through a 0.05, let's make sure that we not only convert that 0.05 to a string, but that before we do so, we multiply it by 100 to turn it back into a 5, then convert that 5 to a string, and then set that text field to a 5 so that it looks like a nicely formatted 5%. And that's everything we need for that method. And getting down to the last of our setters, let's do the set vehicle advertisement. So let's assume that when they're loading the vehicle that there was an ad generated. So we'll do a public void set vehicle advertisement. This will be a string. We'll call it vehicle advertisement. And we're simply going to first make sure that the text field is visible. So we're going to access the view element, the vehicle advertisement text area. We're going to set visibility equal to true. Then we're going to populate it. So we're going to take the text area, we're going to set the text equal to whatever string is passed through. And then we're going to need to check. So let's see if the vehicle advertisement string, and we're going to, it being a string object, access another one of these string methods. This one's going to be the isEmpty. So if it turns out that that string passed through is actually empty, then we've only set the text area to a empty text, which doesn't affect the text area, but then let's go ahead and make sure that we rehide that. And so we're sort of assuming first that there was an ad and that we do need to make it visible, but then after doing that, we'll account for the possibility that there was in fact no ad generated. We'll check to see if that string was empty, and in which case we'll just go ahead and rehide it again. So it's sort of the simplest way to make sure that we are able to account for both possibilities. All right, and that takes care of all of our setter methods. So the last thing that we need to do in this view class is we need to provide methods that will be the listeners, the action listeners for all of these view objects. And so when the save button or the generate ad button or the load or new project buttons are clicked, we need to attach event listeners to those objects so that we can then have the model class actually do something whenever that happens. And so we'll come back in the next video. We're going to set the listeners for just those 4 or 5 elements that we have, and then we'll actually set a small method called an alert method that will pop up with a message whenever something goes wrong. And after that, this class will be done, and we can move on for the last leg of our journey for completing this project. As always, all of the completed code, the finished version of this project, is available with a link to the GitHub that's going to be in the description of the video. Otherwise, I hope this is fun and entertaining. We're kind of coming up on the very end of this project and the end of this video tutorial series, which has been incredible. Hopefully this is fun. We hope to see everyone back again in the next video, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful night.